I am NetMoverSitan. Let us go over the second set of Dante's notes, as there's more that has been updated. These notes were written between Chapter 4.5 and Chapter 5. Yes, Dante continued to make notes on what they've been able to piece together, what they've learned from the mission in District 11, in Chapter 4, to the modification of Mephistopheles in Chapter 4.5. Involving Keikor, Yi Sang's group therapy session, burying at least some of the past, and meeting people that was last seen in the library during the events of Library of Ravenna. There's also some unfinished business that Ishmael would have to deal with, but it was determined that it could wait until Chapter 5 started proper, as it required strong emotion to resonate with the Golden Bar, and that would unfortunately include PTSD flashbacks. Let's see what has been updated so far. Let's start with Mephistopheles. Dante described this as their mobile office, their home, and their method of getting around, where those that are able to eat, along with sleep, go to work, and fight for training purposes. It looks like a mix of a bus and a train, but it's called a bus likely because things are complicated enough as it is. That, and it's based on their department's name. It's powered by an engine described as Faust. Everything that Mephistopheles is because of that engine. It powers the vehicle that drives them places, and it also lets them extract identities from parallel worlds. It allows them to enter break rooms or training rooms via the back door. The engine makes this possible. It can also be upgraded and fitted with additional functions. One of the damned dozen that isn't Faust. I say this because if it was Faust, they'd have specified which one. Dante doesn't know who said this, but the bus was growing. As far as it looking like a train was concerned, now there is the abnormality known as the Express Train to Hell, which is quite fitting considering the source material that Faust is derived from. As for who stated the last part of that, I suspect it was Yi Sang. He's the other genius. That's... And, well, the mirror, that's his work. What else can I say about this? Oh yes, it also is fueled by feeding it the blood and flesh of their enemies. If they're still alive, that means more fuel. Dante also discovered that the bus could transform into a boat, which is what additional functions meant. Well, at least one definition of that, which was made possible by using the resonance tuning fork, a singularity of Eucor, and Mephistopheles' engine, which astonished Mika of the Mola Boatworks. Well, considering that, like a certain blue box, that's the method of getting around of a certain space-time hobo, whose most dangerous enemies are armed with industrial egg whisks and sink plungers, It's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And Dante would not be surprised if other additional functions are added to it in the future. Next we have the Luxcavation Dungeons. Now, this is one of the dungeon types that can be entered via the back door. The training ticket version to the left, and the thread version to the right. Dante noted that they can gather resources to strengthen the Damned Dozen by battling abnormalities or enemies that they faced in the past. It required Enkephalin to enter, as they also require Enkephalin to fuel the engine that Mephistopheles is driven by. As for the mirror dungeons, these dungeons can also be entered via the back door. The corridor leading to that is made of cold, heavy metal, which is different from the wooden doors and corridors, likely to make it clear that this is a serious place, not one to treat lightly. The mirror dungeon doors appeared as time went by. The first one was unlocked, then the second. Faust lets them know when they're unlocked, and Dante understood that there are specific conditions for them to open. Either that, or there's a schedule for when they did so. And when they entered one of these, they arrived at a place that resembled a misty cosmos. They chose which of their deranged, psychologically damaged, or holes they're sent to fight what is in there. And according to Faust, the engine of Mephistopheles activates and stabilizes the mirror dungeons. Well, actively stabilizes. Yes, that's the better way of putting it. That they use for training via the back door, which is their purpose, to improve the capability of the army readily utilizing senselessness. Actually, that's a terrible one, as the abbreviation for that is ANUS. Anyway, Faust recommended that they frequently visit there, even if it uses the fuel that Mephistopheles needs. So it's a choice between more training to become stronger, and fuel to keep their transportation going. Okay then, they'll likely need to find some more to kill. Now let's talk about the back door itself. This is a door on the back end of Mephistopheles, which is connected to a corridor full of doors. Among these doors are the private quarters of Virgilius, Charon, Dante, and the Damned Dozen, along with break rooms. And each of the private quarters has unique looks to them, along with different interior designs, at least from what little Dante can see. What they're actually like is unclear, at least at this point. Faust explained that they might be reflections of each of their personal psyches or memories. There are more people there than there are numbers of doors that they actually use, but what they do use can lead to different spaces, depending on who opens them first. Two of them could enter the same door only to end up in different rooms. The doors with names show which rooms they lead to. Other doors just lead to the other side of the walls that they're on. I seem to recall a long-running sci-fi series involving a space hobo in a blue box of similar properties. We've already gone through that, and it would appear to be how this works here, as there's more space inside than there should be. I can imagine what my personal quarters would be like. Likely involving torches and spikes. Yes, I know, something out of the heavy metal album. The door to Dante's room is either one that opens to the space leading to the mirror dungeons and the excavation dungeons, and also the refraction line, or it's on the other side of the corridor to where it is. Well, the corridor past the back door extends beyond the area that they actually use, but there is a clear indication and a warning not to go beyond that point. Heathcliff and Dante found that out the hard way, when the former went past the threshold in spite of the warnings. The deeper parts of the corridor are clearly not something that they're ready for yet, as Heathcliff has even more nightmares in his head because of that. Even Faust was uncharacteristically urgent regarding this. Ryushu called that endless space the corridor, and she wasn't talking about any corridor. Dante didn't know what she was talking about, but those that have seen Leviathan will know that the corridor is a space outside of normal reality that can allow people to move to different parts of the city much quicker than in normal space. For example, it was capable of taking Virgilius, the Red Gaze, and his fixers from an art gallery in District 22, run by those mad artists that make up the Ring, one of the Five Fingers, one of the most powerful of the syndicates in the backstreets. Those that other organised criminal groups wouldn't dare cross, and it took them all the way to District 14, and that is no short distance considering that the city is approximately the size of many cities as we would know them. So the city is actually a mega city, but they can't actually call this a mega city. Project Moon, to be more precise, as that would likely risk them getting into trouble with the people that own the rights to Judge Dredd. And then there's the Arbiters. They couldn't call them judges for similar reasons. Yes, I know, legal thing. As judges are those with the combined powers of police, judge, jury, and, when necessary, executioner. Yes, those two have been taken. That, and even though the Arbiters have a similar function to the judges, they only appear when it's something serious, like tax evasion or patent violation. And the typical Arbiter, if Guardian and Xena are any indication, are sadists. This is considering that they can take their time when tormenting those that they're about to destroy. Well, if they can, they will. Let's move on to the refraction railways. The back door can also access this. Gregor compared this to the city's subway stations. And yes, there are subway stations, likely for travel only within a district, unless there's a special subway station in each district that has the same immigration procedure as the one on the surface. Yes, and there are also above-ground train lines that run between different countries in our world that can do that, where they check the passengers' passports. Anyway, that train looks quite dilapidated, like it's been there for some time. It has a similar look to Mephistopheles, except with the appearance that it's been left to rot, or rust. When one of Task Force Damned walks on it, it didn't move. But when all of them entered it, along with Dante, the door closed and it took them somewhere. Dante was told that it would take them to the next stop. Each station led to a different environment, some of which were places visited in the past. The door closed behind them, and once they got onto the station, they were then immediately threatened by combative threats. The subway train door closed, and would remain closed until they defeated it. And once they were victorious, the door opened. And once they were all on board, the door would close and they move on to the next stop, and they repeated this until they reached the terminus. Faust described the refraction railway line as simulations, generated locations in order to improve their capabilities, much like mirror dungeons or the excavation dungeons, which made sense to Dante, considering that Chroma was there as well. Someone that they've killed. All they were able to do there was fight her, along with the others, so they were simulations of the original. Yes, it makes sense to me, as the original Chroma would be instantly staggered if Sinclair was using the one who shall grip identity, while the version on the refraction line doesn't. Anyway, Dante was asking if it was a very realistic simulation or if it's actually taking them where they reside. Dante couldn't know for sure, as they didn't have enough information to go on, but once they made it to the end, they could return to the main part of the bus via one of the stations. One of them was furious, likely Heathcliff, as his anger management issues were so bad that if he was gamma irradiated in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it wouldn't take much for him to turn big green destructive. The reason why the one who was furious found it necessary to make this clear was because they believed that they did this all for nothing. That was until Faust opened the Lost and Found box and picked up a whole hoard of resources. The first refraction line. Now, this line was closed, and this line has stations that have a bluish tint to them. Well, the train certainly did. They encountered and fought threats that were familiar, while there were others that they have yet to fight. At least in none of the branches of Lobotomy Corporation so far. They interacted with some of them before, in the mirror dungeons. Faust said that this was because the mirror dungeons were the thought space of them. In fact, this was mentioned in the first act of Chapter 4, when they first encountered the Brazen Bull. Yes, in the mirror dungeon, they encountered the thought space of these abnormalities, their own little worlds, making Dante question if it was a simulation. As for Refraction Railway Line 2, that line had a greenish tint to it. Dante suspected that each refraction line would have a different colour. They forced more abnormalities that they've only glimpsed at before. Task Force Damned cheered initially at there being fewer stations, until Yisang pointed out that there were symbols on the wall, theorizing that they'll need to run that line multiple times, and a new station would be added. Well, towards the end, new stations with each cycle. although they still had to go through the earlier stations to get to them. And they would get progressively harder as they progressed through them. And by the time they got to the 4th cycle, Heathcliff loudly complained about doing the same thing over and over again. Ooh. Heathcliff, if you knew what was going on in what used to be Lobotomy Corporation HQ, you wouldn't be saying that. As at least they weren't aware of all of what happened during that time. Well, almost all of them. However, some were growing increasingly restless as well. Thankfully, Yi Sang told them that the last cycle was the 5th cycle, and well, upon completing that cycle, they collected various resources from the lost and found. Yes, from the lost and found. Dante understood that each line would have its own route and conditions to completing them, as the second line was certainly different from the first. Let's talk about Keikor. Dante didn't understand the flying drones around the city, at least not to begin with, filming scenes of death and pain. But there was a reason for that. They learned why this was the case while carrying out their request for Keikor in Chapter 4. But they weren't sure if it was safe to record this, in case others read these files, and I can understand why. If it was revealed that they were immune to mind-wiping and they knew about K-Corp's singularity, specifically that it's generated by a part of a being that was once a human that travelled with the previous CEO who made a wish from a being that might be as sadistic as the Jinn from Wishmaster by making it cry excessively, which involved physically removing one of the eyes and showing that eye that's in the K-Corp lab images of death and torment. Honestly, they've never considered watching talent shows full of overrated mediocrity at best? That would make me feel dead inside and in constant agony. Yet, they couldn't not record those scenes of death and pain. Even though they didn't want to record it back then, in case they ended up forgetting everything. Along with the rest of what is relevant for this, where the HP ampules are revealed to not be nanobots that can regenerate the body, that make it seem like green fluid. It is actually green fluid. HP bullets or regeneration ampules, they return the body to the form that they remember it before they receive the damage. They then spoke of Stefanette, the founder of the current iteration of Keikor. They went to the outreaches of the outskirts and brought back the tearful thing. That was the child that travelled there with her. The child's wish to the being was that no one would suffer pain again, which they granted by turning them into the tearful thing. When shedding tears, when it felt sorrow, are what can allow those that use them, after diluting and processing, to heal any injury, as long as the brain is intact. As if the head is destroyed, no amount of tears could help with that. Stefanette did this by telling sad or emotional stories. But Alfonso, her successor as CEO, decided, "Good stories. We need to make extracting them more efficient." So she showed violent and shocking imagery to do this, using the glass window, using drones to record footage of people dying painfully, and even importing it from other nests when needed, as the more that it sees one loss of disturbing imagery, the less effective it gets. The glass window was intended to give it a constant supply of footage, but that was incomplete by the time the damned dozen got involved. Not to mention them killing Dong Rang after he went rogue. That seemed to shut down that project. As for the tearful thing that they saw, that was a child entity. Dante theorized that they somehow created children from the tearful thing, but I suspect that they just removed one of its eyes and moved it to that lab. Dante wondered what would happen if a prosthetics user was to be injected with a K-Corp ampule. That apparently happened after Chroma was killed by a Demien Ex Machina. All it did was regenerate your body as you remembered it, as in having arms and legs that haven't melted. During this time, they learned everything about the Singularity, from its origin to its production methods. But after they were put through the memory wipe procedure, Dante was the only one that remembered it. They decided to lay low and pretend that the procedure worked. Even with their limited knowledge of the city, that information might come in handy later. They usually don't show the notes to the others anyway, but from now on, they'd need to be careful who saw it. Now to talk about Lobotomy Corporation. Dante noted that they left behind some of the EGO equipment that the Lobotomy Corporation branches once used to manage the abnormalities. Even though there are conditions and risks to using the EGO weapons and armor, as they were extracted from abnormalities that they used to manage, which can also affect the mood of the wearer or even the speech patterns. Certainly if the wearer doesn't have the right kind of qualities, or in specific amounts. This results in EGO corrosion, if they're used for too long. Even Kali, the Red Mist, struggled to wield the mimicry prototype. At least not without assistance from Carmen. And that's from one of the more powerful abnormalities. And in the Mirror World story of Ishmael with the sloshing set, she started speaking like the fairy gentleman. Dante saw this might pose a problem during future visits to the other branches. Yes, Lobotomy Corporation was once located in District 12, before the head evicted it to the outskirts. As for T-Corp, that was located... well, that is still currently located in District 20. They specialize in temporal technology. Dante has only experienced them through resonating with the Golden Bar. They've not physically been to that district before, so they question how accurate the experience was. Even though Yi Sang confirmed a few details. They seem to value technology and inventions. Yeah, they also made laws that caught some off guard, possibly to snap up some free tech. They also take the expression, time is money, a bit too literally. And they have an attitude towards labour standards that wouldn't be out of place in Victorian London, and likely sent fixes against anyone trying to organise a labour union. Dante noted that the nest was monochromatic, where having any colour was a privilege only to those with power, and just like Victorian London, they gave no to environmental pollution, so the skies were unnaturally darkened there. Then we have Eucor, located in District 21. Their singularity is the resonance tuning fork, which can meld together two items that are different to each other into one, as though they've always been a part of each other. Where it also appears to be why the trash crabs are what they are, likely because they were used as experimental test subjects or possibly as a byproduct of the singularity, where guns and other weapons were melded to mutant crabs, where they're able to use them as if they're naturally born with them. Eucorp's jurisdiction is scattered across the Great Lake, with most of its major institutions located on its surface, implying that some are also under it. They needed a ship to go where they needed to go there, so Mephistopheles was modified using that same singularity by the Mola Boatworks workshop. It also overlaps with the outskirts, so it's certainly one of the more dangerous locations. Their defences are likely to be strong, which explains the barrier that shreds anything that comes across it. They need it to keep certain parts of it safe, such as the beach for nest dwellers only, or those permitted to go to that nest. Let's add a little more about the offices. The associations aren't the only ones fixers might work for. Some even work for offices, each specialising in different things, much like the fixers themselves. Now to talk about something that was briefly mentioned at the end of Chapter 4.5. Deviat Association. Deviat being Russian for 9. They specialise in delivery and transportation. I describe them as a militant FedEx, or any other delivery company that you can think of. There's a specialisation for this because, well, the city is full of dangers around every corner. Let's see, there's criminal syndicate thugs, distortions, abnormalities, mutant creatures, and a number of other threats that might make it difficult for important items or information to be delivered to where they're needed. And also on time, without losing it. Yi-Sang told Dante that while the city may appear minuscule in the bird's eye view, that the map avails one, an approach that contemplates its surface area, and not what a single surface of it shows a world vastly different. The city is tight with brewing buildings in both heaven and earth. Their labyrinthian construction and the singularities paint a picture hidden for the screen. Dante wasn't sure what he was talking about, but they nodded along. Well, considering that the city is at least 200 square kilometers, possibly more, with a population of 7 billion, where the back streets are tightly packed to barely organised messes, and that's just the places above ground. Of course there's going to be a market for securing items and information for delivery. The city would be considered small on the map if you didn't look at the scaling of it. Then we have Dicey Association. That's Italian for 10. They specialise in collecting and researching knowledge. They utilise equipment that deals increased physical strength-based damage, which was derived from knowledge. The harder to obtain and more precious that knowledge is, the greater the strength it grants the user of this. However, it's not without its flaws, as they lose this knowledge once they draw strength from it, which is likely what requires them to reacquire that knowledge in order to be of any use in battle later on, as they likely have some memory of getting that knowledge but don't remember the specifics. Like in some fiction, there are those that have memory of non-personal knowledge, including how to speak the language, but don't remember the personal stuff, as in where they got that knowledge in the first place. Yes, this is an inversion of that. There are those that fight with their fists, and those that fight with their keys. Dante wasn't sure about that, although I can safely say that it will not involve something that is a key part of a certain RPG series with a labyrinthian and incomprehensible lore involving the creations of the Disney Empire. Yeah, that's one. Now for the Seven Association. They specialize in collecting intelligence. Dante saw the similarities between them and the Dicey Association, but one of the identities explained that there is a difference. Seven Association uses whatever means to collect intelligence that they're contracted to find. Dicey Association makes the found knowledge their own by analyzing and deconstructing it. Dante suspected that there is some overlap between the two. Given their specializations, considering that the Seven Association likely makes the use of what the Dicey Association analyzes, and it's likely that the Dicey Association requires the Seven Association to actually get what they need to analyze. As for workshops, they specialize in building and modifying the gear used by fixers. Similar to officers, but they are distinct enough to the fixer officers to be given a different designation. They primarily make and sell weapons, armor, and other things that fixers use and are able to afford. Custom jobs are sometimes contracted for, which is the impression that Dante had, although those are likely to be more expensive, as they're not the mass-produced items that are cheaper and more readily available. Although they don't say no to those kind of contracts relating to combat, like the Rose Spanner Workshop did, for example, which likely is useful for weapons testing, as that would provide an adequate amount of field testing. And yes, workshops are also likely to be Trades Association affiliates as a consequence. The outskirts, well, Dante looks at the map and there's a zone outside the general area of the city where all the nests and backstreets are, known as the outskirts. And monsters are known to exist there, the clockwork teeth being one example of them. Ishmael and Euritius refer to them as such, not to be confused with abnormalities. Like these monsters are mutant creatures and failed experiments that got sent out to the outskirts as impurities, as declared by the head. Some of them might even be illegal AI. Dante doesn't think that it's likely that they'll visit the outskirts, as they doubt that Lobotomy Corporation would build a branch outside the city. And Ishmael mentioned that the Great Lake overlaps with the outskirts. As for Lobotomy Corporation building anything in the outskirts, about that, they did so with a lab to conduct research that they didn't want the head to know about. When Michelle, one of the Eye's informants, ratted them out, the Eye being B Corp, they sent Garion, or rather they got the head, or A Corp, to send Garion, an arbiter to soften them up by coercing Daniel, an elite recruited by Carmen, to release all of the abnormalities, and then 2 claws arrived to make sure that none of them survived. All due to a precognitive vision that someone there might make an AI. However, despite their best efforts, they failed to kill the one that would end up creating this AI. Specifically, Angela. Yes, they caused what they intended to prevent. The creation of an AI, as Ayin survived. But at the cost of the life of Kali, the Red Mist. So the possibility of going into the outskirts to a Lobotomy Corporation facility is not something to be entirely dismissed. In fact, they might even find the library there. Now for the Great Lake. This is a massive lake at the south end of the city. Some call it the sea or the ocean. It isn't one big pool of water. It's divided by straight lines into several small sections, all with unique colours. Dante only saw a small part of it, but it reminded them of patchwork fabric. According to Ishmael, the Great Lake is full of treacherous natural disasters and monsters. Even if she's right and it might be too soon for them to go there. And they weren't ready. They didn't have much say in the matter, as Limbus Company ordered them there, so it's that decision that's getting them onto that suicide mission that's worse than usual. Dante wasn't sure of what they were supposed to do. And I really hope that this isn't U-Corp playing a strategy game in the Great Lake. Well, it's certainly not a giant-sized version of Battleship. As for the memory wipe procedure, this is used to wipe specific memories, such as the truth about a singularity, for example. Before leaving K-Corp, they all took turns entering a room. The procedure ended when they walked out with their memories wiped, yet with Dante, they remembered everything about K-Corp that they wanted to forget. Or rather, K-Corp wanted them to forget. Yes, that's the more accurate way of putting it. Yet, Dante didn't remember the memory wipe procedure itself. They questioned why it didn't work on them. Why couldn't they remember anything about the memory wipe procedure? Perhaps the room is like the neuralizer from Men in Black. Except without the flashy thing. Where they walk in, it happens, and they walk out with the specific memory wiped. Well, except for Dante, of course. Either that, or the protection from the memory wipe in Dante's case was that it was everything between when he entered it and when he went out, where everything in between wasn't protected. Although, I'm thinking the former is more likely the case, that the room itself does the memory wiping. Now to talk about the monsters. Dante believed that all monsters were either abnormalities or distortions, but in reality, while all abnormalities are monsters, not all monsters are abnormalities. The trash crabs are prime examples of monsters that aren't abnormalities. They are, in fact, mutants that are an acquired taste to those living in the back streets of District 21. Not as prevalent as abnormalities and distortions, but they're sometimes mentioned in creepy tales or legends of the city. The outskirts and the Great Lake have quite a few monsters. There might even be some within the city and outside it. Dante is having problems categorizing them at this point. There are some abnormalities that can pass for human, such as the magical girls, or anime come to life as I call them, when they're not in mini kaiju form. The distortions? No confusing them for human. Even Elena, a blood fiend that looks like a cross between the Nosferatu abnormality and a Ginderbend Two-Face. And as for monsters, some of them have a human face. And I'm not talking about a bunch of Leatherface impersonators in the back streets of District 23. I'm talking about those that are human in appearance, but their behaviour is barely human. With Fixes, a prime example is, it was the Blue Reverberation, where I've described him as a cross between Ra's al Ghul and the Joker. With Syndicates, a prime example of this is Jumsun, or rather, was Jumsun, a maestro of the ring, which is like the equivalent of a thumb sotocapo, who is a mad artist even by that Syndicate standards, who experimented on the orphans that came from the orphanage that Virgilius kept visiting. And Jimsoon wanted to do this as a creative act of artistic expression. With the Wings, a prime example of this is, of course, any of the Arbiters. Think the judges in the Judge Dredd universe, but vicious sadists who have woven cruelty and suffering into the very fabric of the city. The worst part is, they don't get involved directly unless there's something worth their attention, such as tax evasion, patent violation, the occasional wing that gets the wrong ideas, or, at worst, anyone that might be making an AI. That last one is one of the worst crimes possible there. They're capable of evicting buildings into the outskirts with the help of B Corps, after declaring what's in such buildings to be impurities. But they only do that as a last resort. However, of all the monsters in the city and the outskirts, they are the worst monsters of all. Then there is, of course, the library. Dante only heard about this in passing, but they understood that it wasn't any old library. The Mola Burtworks fixers mentioned this. They went in there, something awful happened, and then they returned from a book? Dante doesn't know enough to make sense of this, so they wrote this down and put it aside for now. And then there's, finally, for now at least, Walpurgis Night, a special period when identities and EGO can be extracted that normally can't be. Though the timelines and worlds that can be accessed are expanded during this period, they can't extract random identities and EGO from all over the place. Faust explained that whoever is extracted during this period will be relevant to all of them. At least to Limbus Company's current state of affairs, anyway. It arrives periodically. At least that's what Faust told them it would. Usually, Faust keeps them in the dark with all the details. Although it is clear that the next Walpurgis night will be different from the first one that appeared. Well, that's the end of that. At least for this session. Until next time. Hail the rabbits!